Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Today I want to talk about a subject that definitely is polarizing in the gun community, and the people that choose one way or the other tend to be very strong in that direction. To carry with one in the pipe or not to carry with one in the pipe? That's the question of the day. And really what it focuses on is when you carry your gun for concealed carry primarily, it could also apply to home defense. Do you have a round in the chamber where the gun is ready to fire if the trigger is pulled and the safeties are disengaged? Or do you have to take an action to chamber a round before you can use the gun? And there's a lot of reasons why somebody may choose to do one or the other. It may get into comfortable with the gun, the operating mechanism of the gun, various different factors. So I'm going to talk through that and why you would choose one or the other, and how the gun itself may influence your decision, and some of the potential consequences of choosing not to carry one in the chamber. And mostly, focuses around a particular situation that involves your need to pull a gun, is usually an imminent situation. So let's talk about the reasons why somebody might decide they don't want to carry one in the pipe. One of them is if you're a newer shooter, especially if you're new to concealed carry, you may be worried about the gun going off on its own. You may not be comfortable with the gun, you may not trust it yet. Or you may have a gun whose operating mechanism isn't what you would choose to carry. This is in 1911. The whole concept behind the 1911 is carry it cocked and locked. But that wouldn't necessarily be your choice, but that's what you've got in the moment. So, for example, when Hammer first started carrying, he carried with one without one in the chamber till he got used to the concept of having a weapon in his pocket that was loaded. And so then he started carrying one in the pipe with a gun that had a manual safety that you could turn on. And that gave that extra layer of protection. After getting comfortable with that, so now you've got one in the pipe, you've got one loaded, it's ready to go, but there's one more step kind of blocking that. Then he migrated up to carrying a striker-fired gun, not necessarily a Glock. He's kind of partial to like the FNS and others, that he's carrying this, no mechanical safety or no thumb safety, all internal safeties, and a round in the chamber. So to some cases, it's a progression. For those that don't want to carry one in the chamber, when you pull the gun out, just pointing it at the threat and hoping that the threat will quake in its boots and run off is usually a losing gamble. Generally, if it's an animal, doesn't even understand the concept of a gun. So if you're being attacked by a bear or a mountain lion, a coyote, or a wild dog, it doesn't even know what this thing means. And in the case of a two-legged threat, chances are pretty good they've already taken into their mind the concept that their intended victim or prey might have a weapon, and it may not deter them sufficiently. So you're in a situation now, you've got this thing, somehow holstered, whether it's in a pocket holster or whether it's in a holster on your waistband. You separate it from the holster, which that can be done one-handed. But now I got to do something with the slide. I got to get a hold of it, rack it. And that assumes that I have the use of this hand at the moment. And without getting into a whole bunch of tactical, fancy scenarios where I might not have use of this hand, let's just do a couple simple ones. I'm using this hand to hold an attacker at bay. I'm using this hand to try to hold a door closed to keep the attacker on the other side of the door. I'm using this hand to support my weight, like under a table or something like that. So I don't necessarily have this hand available to me. And even if I do, right now I'm under a whole lot of stress. So your fine motor control kind of goes out the window. And there are training processes you can go through, to bring the gun up, bring the other hand up, and have it all be kind of the cycle that you kind of slingshot it as you go. But you have to keep in mind that anything that requires multiple steps in the heat of the moment when you're pulling a gun is multiple places where the whole situation may fail. You may short chuck it, which might then not only may not chamber it, but it could actually cause it to jam. You might get it where you've got a round stuck halfway into the chamber. And in that case, you can go to the tap, rack, bang thing. Well, chances are pretty good the threat, whether it's two-legged or otherwise, isn't going to wait around and give you the courtesy of fixing that issue. So what you're doing is you're putting yourself at a disadvantage, even from a time perspective. I draw the gun, I bring it up, and I point it. I'm ready to go. At this point, I'm ready to engage the threat. I've got the finger on the side of the gun, I'm not on the trigger. And if I choose to fire, pull it up, pull, bang. That's how quick I can get the gun fired. Whereas in a situation where I've got a rack it before I do that. I got to get it out of its area. I've got to rack it. Chances are pretty good I'm going to be in some suboptimal angle. Then I got to go ahead and get it on target and then put my finger on the trigger and fire. So a lot of time is going by. So in all reality, one in the pipe is the way to go if you are past the point of comfort. Here's the key though. If you're not comfortable carrying one in the pipe, you better be training on how to get one in the pipe, because by definition, any fight that you're in where this thing comes out is now a gunfight, and the threat may have one of its own and may be in a position to get it operable before yours. But let's talk about a couple different guns and their operating mechanisms and why you may or may not want one in the pipe in a particular gun. So let's say, take for example a 1911. Then in 1911, of course, you can only put the safety on when the hammer is back. You can operate the thumb safety. They have multiple safeties. There's a grip safety. Of course, it has the thumb safety. If this were an 80 series, then it would also have a firing pin block. This happens to be a 70 series. It's a Colt government model. And these have been carried successfully by military and concealed carriers for years in exactly this configuration. One in the pipe, hammer back, safety on, and that is considered a safe way to carry this gun. But I know many people that the whole cocked and locked thing, where the perception is the only thing separating them from firing and not is this thumb safety, makes them nervous. They're always afraid that in the holster or messing around or scratching their belly or whatever they might do, that they're going to bump this safety. And then, of course, on a 1911, very short trigger. Doesn't take much to make this gun actually fire, assuming that grip safety was depressed. So if you had a 1911, let's say this gun was given to you, that's the only gun you had, your budget limited you going out and buying something different, and the whole cocked and locked made you nervous, you might choose to carry this without one in the pipe. However, my recommendation would be either get used to the cocked and locked or start saving up to get a gun that you can feel comfortable carrying. Save this for range day, because again, even with the 1911, you've got to deal with the whole concept of getting it ready to go, and that can be a little bit time consuming. Or of course you could always trade it in on on a different gun. So set that down, and let's talk about the double actions. And this one happens to be a CZ75 SP01 Phantom. But fundamentally, there's a whole lot of guns in this territory. Mounted the older classic SIGs, the CZs, they all operate in a similar way. And the concept of these is that when the hammer's back, you can pull down on a lever and drop the hammer safely. Most of them also have a quarter cock or half cock type position. Notice the hammer's not all the way down. If I were to have fired the gun, the hammer would be all the way sitting down on the firing pin. But when I operated the decocker, it set the hammer down offset from the firing pin. And there's usually a mechanical lock that if you were to drop it and it happened to hit the hammer, it would have to break that mechanical lock, as well as defeating the internal drop safeties. Some of these, even the safety, the decocker also acts as a safety. So you can push it down, it'll decock it, and push a little further and it'll lock it. It's also a safety, so you can have multiple layers. But as a general rule, these DASA guns that include a decocker, when the decocker is used to lower the hammer, can be safely carried in effectively double action mode with the hammer down on a loaded chamber, and it would take quite a bit to make this gun go off. The additional comfort is that you have a fairly heavy, fairly long trigger pull to get it to fire, and then of course it's going to cycle, cock the hammer, and now you're onto a very short, light trigger pull. One potential issue there is a little inconsistency. The first pull is long and heavy, and every subsequent pull is much lighter. But conceptually, if you're just uncomfortable in the beginning and you want to graduate to round in the chamber, this is a good way to start. Round in the chamber day one, use the decocker, set the hammer into the decock position, and now you're pretty safe. Now, just because the guns look the same doesn't mean they function the same. This one has a safety, does not have a decocker. There's really no safe way to put this into a hammer down situation. It's not designed to be carried that way. So this one would be just like a 1911 that you would carry cocked and locked, even though it is a double action, single action. There's no good way to get this in the double action mode hammered down on a live round. So something like this, you would carry either cocked and locked like a 1911 or no extra round in the chamber. I mean, no round in the chamber. Now, here's a situation where you might have been carrying cocked or a round in the chamber. Of course, this is a striker-fired gun similar to the Glock. You might have been carrying this round in the chamber all along, be quite comfortable with it. And then a recoil came out. The recoil focused around the design of the trigger and the lack of a trigger safety. So you're in a position, of course this is a P320, you're in a position where if this were dropped just right, the trigger would actually pull itself through inertia, disengaging the internal drop safeties, and the gun would fire. And it was well documented that that was happening. So there was from the point that was identified, there was a delay before you could even register for the recall. There was a further delay before you could actually send your gun in. So in that situation, you might have found out, Monday morning that that issue exists, but you're not going to be able to do anything about it. So you might take a gun that up until that moment you thought was perfectly safe to carry around in the chamber, no external safeties, again, just similar to a Glock, that you've now found out to the contrary. And until you can take some other action, getting another gun ready to use, getting the recall done, you may choose to temporarily carry this without a round in the chamber, but then it is going to go back to you need to be in a position trained to get a round into the chamber in case that's the day that you end up using it. Then you move into the Glocks, very similar to the P320. Glocks have a very long-standing track record of not firing when they're dropped and only firing when the trigger is pulled. They have the split trigger, just like several other of the striker-fired guns. That prevents an inertial pull of the trigger. They have internal drop safeties. So pretty much with a Glock, you're pretty confident that the only way this thing's going to go off is if I pull the trigger. And some pretty terrible things have been done to these. They've been dragged behind trucks, they've been thrown off roofs, they've been thrown out of helicopters. All sorts of really nasty things have been done to the various Glocks, and none of them have gone off. But this is a pocket gun, or a small inside the waistband gun. Well, let's do it in the context of a pocket gun. One reason you might not want to carry around in the chamber is you got this thing in your pocket and you go to dig it out and you pull the trigger by accident or your keys get in there. Well, that's not a problem you want to solve with the round in or out of the chamber. That's a problem you want to solve more appropriately, number one, with a holster that covers the trigger. You shouldn't carry any gun that you have access to the trigger until you pull the gun. And additionally, the pocket that contains the gun should contain the gun. Your car keys, your coins, everything else belongs somewhere else. Not just because of the trigger, but just if any of those foreign objects interfere with the draw of the gun, interfere with the function of the gun, get caught into the gun, that's a bad situation. So if you're thinking about pocket and you're not wanting to shoot off parts of your body that you'd prefer to keep, you solve that by appropriately carrying the gun, not by removing a round from the chamber. Because let's just say keys, for example. So I don't have a round in the chamber, I don't have a holster, I'm safe, right? My keys get up in here. And of course they can't fire. I go to pull the gun, I can't get the gun out because the keys are hanging up on my pocket. Or I do get the gun out and the keys are jammed in the trigger or somewhere else in the gun, I can't get the gun into play. So don't solve the wrong problem, solve the right problem. Make sure that you're carrying the gun appropriately. The last gun I didn't have initially on the table, kind of a little bit crowded here. Of course, we've got a revolver. And if any of you guys have seen an older cowboy movie, you've heard the gunslinger say, you only load 5, and there's actually a little procedure to go through with the sequence of loading. But if your gut tells you to load 6 that day, load 6. So in a revolver, you can't carry it with a live round in the chamber. Well, that's not true anymore. What they're talking about are the old single-action revolvers, where in most cases, the hammer had a firing pin spur on it. The firing pin was actually on the hammer's little protrusion, and there was nothing that stopped the firing pin from hitting the primer if that hammer came down. And of course their metallurgy and their designs weren't as robust as modern designs, so it was very easy for that hammer to come down on a live round. So they carried one not in the chamber, so they'd always have an empty cylinder sitting on the hammer. Of course, on a revolver, if it's a single-action revolver, when you cock it, it rotates the cylinder. If it's a double-action revolver, when you pull the trigger, it rotates the cylinder. So it does get you on the live round more quickly than an automatic. You can get a revolver onto a live round with one hand without having to touch the gun. However, on anything but an older single-action revolver, any of these modern revolvers, they're designed to be safe that if they're dropped on the hammer, there's multiple mechanisms in here in the design of the hammer and in the firing pin. Some of them use a transfer bar. You see that transfer bar moves up when the hammer is back, which is effectively when the trigger is pulled. And then as I lower it, if I can get it to show you, it's kind of hard to do, you'll see that transfer bar is moving out of the way. So by the time the hammer gets down, the bar is out of the way, and that bar bridges a gap between the hammer and the firing pin. So at this point, if I were to do this, that hammer can't hit the firing pin. You might think, okay, well, how's it actually fire? Well, when I fire it, I'm going to pull the trigger. And that trigger is still going to be back when the hammer makes it all the way down, because it's going to snap in a fraction of a second. So that transfer bar is still up. So with a modern revolver, really there's nothing to worry about, unless, of course, you are either carrying the hammer back. In this position, there is no safeties. You touch that trigger, it's going to fire. You would carry the hammer down, and of course, again, if you follow the process of having a holster, now this holster doesn't fit it, but you get the point. You'd have a holster that would come up and cover the trigger, and you keep keys and stuff away from it. Any modern revolver is perfectly safe to carry with a full cylinder, and actually desirable because, of course, you have less capacity in a revolver. So in summary, carry it with a round in the chamber. Carry it in a safe way with the round in the chamber, based on the operating mechanism of the particular gun you've chosen. Use an appropriate way to carry it, holster. Keep things that aren't appropriate for the gun away from the gun, and train with it. The biggest thing to train with is to ensure that when I pull the gun, you start right from the beginning with your finger alongside the holster. When I pull the gun, my finger lands on the frame. Make sure that you don't, in your training, that you don't find yourself pulling the gun and touching the trigger at the same time. In the heat of the moment, you're going to have a hard time controlling that. But if you train yourself to even reach for the gun with the finger along the frame, when the gun comes out, whether it's coming out of a pocket holster or whether it's coming out of an inside the waistband holster, even if I'm stressed and I'm squeezing, you can actually see my thumbnail turning white because I'm squeezing this thing to death out of this thing because I'm terrified right now. The situation is horrible. Nothing's happening. And when I finally decide I need to shoot, I move to the trigger, and it's a quick hop down. So if I were in a situation where I was aimed at my target and it was go time, there we go. So it's not like this adds a lot of delay, and it adds a whole lot less delay than that. If you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe. Don't forget to click that little bell if you subscribe. Check us out on Facebook and Patreon, and have a great day. Thank you.